Of National Review and syndicated columnist with United Press Syndicate. In this morning's USA Today, the entire editorial page is devoted to South Africa. Thomas Hazlitt, who is an economist at the University of California at Davis, under the headline, "Let South Africa Mind Its Own Affairs," writes, "No matter the impotency of boycotts on Cuban cigars or Russian wheat, this cry to involve the USA in South Africa's race relations is advanced by many who told us the USA had no business dictating democratic ideals to the Vietnamese." Do you agree?
Yes. I think he's right when he says that it's hard to find an honest isolationist. In fact, as a matter of fact, most of the people who were isolationists in World War II weren't really neutralist. They didn't really want total isolation. They just didn't want the U.S. in that particular war. And the people who've been accused of being neo-isolationists are usually people who didn't want us in Vietnam, but wouldn't mind if we were fighting a war with South Africa. So I think he's got a strong point there.
Joseph Sobran, last week, a column published in the Washington Times, your syndicated national column, and I assume it doesn't necessarily run everywhere at the same time, so some people may not have seen it yet. You have a headline on your column, "The Hive Goes to South Africa. South Africa has provided the Hive with its greatest rallying point since Vietnam." What's the Hive?
Well, that's a metaphor I use, and in fact it's going to be the basis of a book, I hope, in the near future, a book I've been working on for a long time with Tom Bethel, about the symbiosis between all kinds of people, communists, some people we call liberals here, socialists, social democrats, and they're not working for Moscow, but they do work harmoniously with Moscow. They're hostile to anti-communism. They agree on a wide variety of things, South Africa being one. It's a great, as I say, it's a great rallying point, the way Vietnam was. So you find these people like the different kinds of bees in a hive, you know, workers, drones, queen, and they all perform their little specialties, and they don't know the whole system. It's the opposite of a conspiracy in certain respects, because in a conspiracy, everybody knows. Everybody's an initiate. We all know what we're up to. But if we're part of something like a beehive, then we don't have to know. We cooperate instinctively, and we're not even aware of the total order our actions form. So I think this is the way these people are. And they swarm against common enemies like Ronald Reagan or South Africa, in some cases the Pope, or Jerry Falwell, or Phyllis Schlafly. I mean, the targets can be domestic or foreign, large or small. It all depends, but they do have this strange way of cooperating and echoing each other.
In your column, you include some people that I assume you see on a daily basis around the nation's capital, wherever you travel. The politically progressive hive includes communists, fellow travelers, socialists, and then we get into people that we see every day, liberals, moderate Republicans, campus activists, feminists, gay activists, civil rights workers, civil libertarians, anti-nuke types, and so forth. The obvious question is it fair to everybody to lump them in that one big group? I mean, I can hear people out there saying this morning, let me get to the phone.
Well, yeah, I think it's fair in a certain respect. I don't mean that all these feminists, for instance, are working for Moscow. Nothing like that. They're working for themselves. They all are. The worker bee is not working for the queen bee. The queen bee gives a certain orientation to the worker bee. But these people are autonomous. It's just that there's a natural tendency to cooperate among them, because they're really driven by a kind of socialist paradigm. They can't imagine any other kind of order except a state-imposed order. They're always asking for more state power, demanding it as a moral imperative, except in certain areas like sexual freedom. That particular area, for a complex reason, is a little different. But in general, they want the state to direct everything.
Okay, let me read another paragraph from your column of last week. For instance, liberal bees are sincerely indignant about South Africa's apartheid system. It never occurs to them that they could get equally indignant about sexism in South Africa. It's much more fun.
Saudi Arabia.
I mean, I'm sorry, Saudi Arabia. Yeah. It's much more fun, much more natural to join the swarm in front of the South African embassy than to be a lone picketer at the Saudi embassy. Now, question is, are you saying then that this whole South African uprising on the part of people in this country is wrong?
Well, not exactly wrong, but it's sort of obsessive. It's like a convention. For instance, I was walking across the campus of Princeton University a few months ago with a friend of mine who's a professor, and we noticed there were posters advertising a rally against South Africa. Now I thought, if it hadn't become a kind of social convention to get indignant about South Africa, would these kids really care? No. I mean, this has become a highly ritualized form of behavior. It's not as if these kids had independently discovered the special iniquity of South Africa. It's just that it's singled out for sort of ideological reasons. That's not quite the right word, because there's a tendency to read our own history back into another country. We see South Africa as sort of recapitulating our own racial history. And I mean, that's the natural kind of primitive way to react to it. And so you want to demand the same kind of things there that we have here, if you think we've taken the right course here, I guess. But no, it's like, yeah, people can't think dialectically, philosophically, unless they're really trained to. And if they're not, they tend to be very concrete bound and to see the same story everywhere. They interpret everything through the kind of mythic lenses they have. Racial oppression, we shall overcome, Civil Rights Act, one man, one vote. You know, they think this is the pattern that every country should follow.
Have you ever been to South Africa?
No.
In this morning's, on the front page of one of this morning's Monday morning editions of the weekly magazines, here's U.S. News and World Report. Can South Africa avoid a race war? Inside, there is an interview with the chairman of the Foreign Relations Committee, Senate Foreign Relations Committee, Richard Lugar. And he's asked, will sanctions pressure South Africa to relent or to get even tougher? I don't see how President Botha could possibly take a tougher line. And while he says he favors negotiations, there are no apparent parties to negotiate, no apparent agenda. He made it clear that he doesn't want to be pushed and that further difficulty will lead to even more repression. What do you think of sanctions?
Well, I'm sort of against them in that, again, I think we're projecting our own liberal notions onto other countries where they don't fit. They're not going to have one man, one vote in South Africa unless the whites simply decide to give up on their own right of self-government. Now, how do you reconcile their right of self-government with the blacks' right of self-government? Well, that's tricky. I mean, we've had that problem in all sorts of countries, from the U.S. at its founding to Israel today. I mean, countries that take democracy seriously always run into a certain problem. I mean, a minority does not want to be diluted in a huge majority. That's why we had states' rights in this country. People were very jealous of those for a long time until they felt pretty comfortable and trusted people in the other states more than they did at first. But in Israel, for example, they've got the problem of a large Palestinian population now on the West Bank. What are they going to do? Are they going to just let them all vote, or what? So you've got people like Rabbi Meir Kahane, who wants to just expel them all, drive all the Arabs out of Israel, including the West Bank. Because otherwise there are going to be so many Arabs, it's not going to have the character of a Jewish state anymore. I don't say he's right, but I'm saying he's facing something that more sentimental people don't want to face.
Joseph Sobran, a national syndicated columnist, our guest for the next 50 minutes. We'll go to the phones in about 5 minutes, but we want to point out to you that in all of the papers that we have here, there's plenty of information this morning on the South African situation. An example is this op-ed piece by Bruce Bartlett in the Wall Street Journal, Sanctions Almost Never Work. He's from the Heritage Foundation. He says, while there is no question that apartheid is abhorrent, before rushing into sanctions, we ought to give serious thought as to whether they will work. There is little historical evidence that sanctions have ever achieved their purpose. More often than not, they end up making the embargoed country more self-reliant, self-sufficient, strengthened in its resolve to continue its policies. The result may be a strengthening of apartheid rather than its demise. And he cites a study done by Gary Clyde Huffbauer and Jeffrey Schott of the Institute of International Economics, in which they studied 103 episodes. Since 1973, the number of cases where sanctions have achieved any success has fallen to about 1 in 4. What's your reaction to that, Joe Sobran?
Well, Brian, I think that what you always find is a kind of evaluation disguised as an empirical judgment. If you don't like a country, you say sanctions are going to work there. We need sanctions against that country. And if you do like it, or basically approve of it, you say, well, the sanctions won't work. I don't really know. I wonder about this. I hear conservatives saying that sanctions won't work here. On the other hand, they want sanctions against the Soviet Union. I don't say Bruce Bartlett does, but I know a lot of people take these very inconsistent positions, because they don't really hate South Africa the way they hate the Soviet Union. With liberals, it's the other way around. And on the other hand, you know, you find both of them being big free traders. They assume that restrictions on international trade of any kind are bad for both sides. Liberals and conservatives, generally speaking, feel this way. They're not protectionist. So they see the pitfalls of interfering with trade, which would imply that sanctions might have some kind of impact.
We have the cover here of Newsweek magazine, you chocolate lovers, warning, America's sweet tooth may be hazardous to its health. But back here on the back page is a column that's on the point that we're talking about this morning, collision course in South Africa. Now this is a column that's every other week by Meg Greenfield. She's also the editorial page editor of the Washington Post. And then here she starts off by saying, people who go to South Africa tend to become obsessed. I had not expected it to happen to me when I made the visit a few years ago. For one thing, I had set out with a curiosity, but little excitement. In truth, I felt somewhat dutiful about the trip. It would be journalistically helpful. She jumps down here to say, you know what's coming next? I think South Africa is the most possessing, poignant place I've ever been. I have not been able to get it out of my mind since. And she goes on to talk about the differences between the blacks and the whites. The races laugh about and curse each other with a peculiar intimacy, as in families that are coming apart. You have not read the whole piece. It's unfair to ask you to comment on that. But what about the travel back and forth between this country and South Africa? Is it the in thing to do now?
Well, I think that a lot of people seem to be obsessed with it without ever having been there. I wish we could change the subject. We've talked about two things all summer, Brian: AIDS and South Africa. And it's getting a little monotonous.
We also, well, let me continue to talk about South Africa to show you how it's being played in this morning's Washington Post.
I don't mind talking about it today. It's just...
Okay. Here's the lead story. Tutu rejects joining delegation to Botha, and that is a meeting, I think, later on today. But here's a comment that jumped out from yesterday's Face the Nation, in which Bishop Tutu appeared, I believe. Make sure that I'm assigning this to the right individual. Yes. I've never felt more sense of foreboding. I think we're on the brink of disaster unless America intervenes. Should America intervene? And is he talking about economic sanctions, or do they expect more?
I guess he means sanctions, or I think Bishop Tutu would like us to do anything that's in our power to do. Whether that's a good idea from our point of view is another matter. I don't think it is. I don't know what he means by disaster. It reminds me again of the old days here. The way in the 60s, you know, Brian, how the civil rights leaders always used to predict a long, hot summer. Is it really a prediction, or is it an invitation? I don't know. I mean, it could be a little of both. It could be a self-fulfilling prophecy. It could be a lot of things. But I don't think that we should be inveigled into that situation. I really don't. I mean, I don't know what's right. I know how we would resent it if they were telling us what to do all the time. I mean, there are lots of ways you can cut this cake. You know, the South Africans could say to us, you know, we disapprove of your abhorrent abortion policy in your country. We're going to cut off these strategic minerals until you people mend your ways. Well, how would we feel about that? Now, I'm against abortion. I'd still feel it was sort of impudent for another country to be peering in on us and telling us how to act like that, because we value our sovereignty.
Joseph Sobran will be with us for 45 minutes. The phone lines are open on this Monday morning. The numbers have been on your screen. We have all the East Coast lines lighted. A couple of West Coast lines are still open at 202-783-2727. And we're talking about Joe Sobran's theory, the beehive theory, of how people travel together, sometimes of different thoughts, and he will either defend or discuss more of this as the hour goes on. Let's take our first morning call from Manhattan. Go ahead, please.
Hello?
You're on the air.
Good morning, Brian.
Good morning. Please.
Hi.
Mr. Sobran, you write for, or at least you used to, I think, anyway, National Review?
Yes.
Okay, you still do?
Yep.
Okay, because I haven't gotten them lately. I haven't gotten it lately, but I pick it up periodically. And what I wanted to ask is, and Brian, I'd appreciate it if you let me remain on for a follow-up. Okay, thanks. And here's what I want to ask. I'm a conservative, I guess. I mean, I would consider myself a devotee of the late Senator Henry Jackson of Washington. Strength abroad, compassion at home, I guess. But in the foreign policy question, I would just like to say this, and this hasn't been answered, I don't think, in a while. The fact that Ronald Reagan has not responded, I think, to the fact that our Marines were blown up in Beirut, and lately Robert Dean Steedham died, may all their souls rest in peace, and the fact that he talked tough and didn't do anything. Weren't you, as a conservative, and I know I was at least disappointed the fact that he was talking a whole lot and didn't doing anything about it.
Okay, hold on.
So what did you feel about that? And if I can remain on for follow-up.
You can. Go ahead. Mr. Sobran?
Well, it didn't seem to me we had a clear objective in Lebanon. In fact, it's much more important to define your values and your objectives than it is to talk tough. Now, it's fine to be tough in following up on your principles, but you've got to have those principles to begin with. And I don't think that in Beirut, in Lebanon, that we had any sort of clear idea what we were up to.
Follow up?
No, because I just wanted to say that, you know, when we elected Ronald Reagan, when the people elected Ronald Reagan, I voted for Gene Kirkpatrick, as a matter of fact. I didn't vote for Ronald Reagan, but what I was going to say is because we have a negotiation coming up with the Russians, and I just feel that Ronald Reagan, in saying all the things that he said, that about doing this, about retaliating, about swift and effective, about this and that, and then not doing anything, I think that, like, maybe the best policy is not to say something and to do something, and the second best policy is not to say something and to do nothing, and the third best policy is to say something and to do something, and I guess the last policy is Ronald Reagan, what he did was to say something and to do nothing.
Okay.
I agree. There was a terrible lack of definition and resolve.
On the front page of the Washington Post is an article I'd like to get Joe Sobran's quick reaction to. Thomas Etzel writes it. TV preacher eyes GOP nomination. 700 Club host could become potent wild card in 88 race. It includes an interview with him. This first started, I think, on the cover of the Saturday Evening Post a couple of months ago. And it goes into some detail here about Pat Robertson and the 700 Club and his quest, or not so obvious quest, for the presidency. Your reaction?
Well, I don't know anything about Pat Robertson, really. I tend to like the so-called fundamentalist preachers in general. I think they're good people, and they've been unfairly maligned. I'd like to see someone like that in the race, just on general principles, I guess. But I don't know him in particular, so I can't really say.
There's a quote here, I just don't see where it is going, or where it goes, says Charles Black, a senior advisor to the Reagan-Bush campaign in '84. But I want the audience to see the depth of the story. Here's another photograph of Pat Robertson up here, a potential GOP candidate. Does a 700 Club broadcast while standing in front of a symbol of the family. One of the paragraphs, Robertson's belief in securing the intervention of Jesus Christ through prayers extends to his claims that he has kept at bay hurricanes, which frequently threaten Tidewater, Virginia. On a recent television show, Robertson said his prayers once headed off a storm. We rebuked that thing. We commanded it, unquote. Any reaction to the article or that kind of a comment?
Well, he believes that prayer works. That's good right there.
Joe Sobran, we go to San Diego. Good morning.
Yes, I have the San Diego Union in front of me, and the headline is Labor Unions are fighting to stay in business, and the subject on South Africa is police arrest 152 South Africans, 2 more blacks killed, and firebomb.
Your question for Joe Sobran. Thank you.
Yes, first of all, I would like to know what your guest meant by South Africa is monotonous. He put it in the same line with the only thing people have been talking about is AIDS in South Africa, and I didn't get what he meant, the context or the connotation.
Okay, stay where you are, please.
Well, I just meant that it's become the obsessive subject of the news lately. I'd like to hear news of other things, too. But I was reacting humorously to what Brian had said.
Go ahead, caller. Your comment?
Yes. My comment is that I think South Africa has to stay in the news at this point, the way the Jews and Hitler was in the news. This is not only an economic thing, it's a moral issue. And I think as long as something morally is on people's conscience, you cannot just blow it away. And I agree in one respect, sanctions are not going to do it. I mean, you on one hand, you're talking about taking away the business away from South Africa, but you still have racism. Even if you take every dime out of South Africa, what are we going to do about the mentality of people?
Okay.
And that's what we have to get to.
Thank you, San Diego. Mr. Sobran?
Well, I agree. It shouldn't be out of the news. It's not that. And in fact, it's going to dominate the news. But I was only remarking on how obsessed we have become. And not only obsessed, but that we don't seem to get anywhere with it. I don't know much about South Africa. I'm no expert. I've never been there, as they say. But even just reading about it, I can tell that the usual analogies we use are too facile. For instance, this gentleman remarked on Jews in Hitler's Germany. Now, I don't know what he meant by that, but I know some people liken the situation of blacks in South Africa to Jews under Hitler. Well, it's not the same at all, because the whites are trying to preserve dominance there. They're not trying to exterminate blacks. You know, there are killings, there are murders, there are all kinds of things that they do. But the program is not to get rid of blacks. The program is not to destroy them. I don't think it can be summed up as hate in the way Hitler most definitely hated Jews.
Indianapolis, Indiana. Good morning.
Good morning, Brandon. Good morning to your guest.
Good morning.
And if you just bear with me, I would like to first ask your guest a question, which is, has he ever visited Indiana, especially Indianapolis? Also, that I believe that he has the leanings of a conservative. But speaking, I want to go back to the South African situation and combine it with what goes on here in Indianapolis, Indiana.
Okay, let me just hold on just a second. Have you ever been to Indianapolis, Joe Sobran?
I'm sorry to say I haven't.
Okay. There's one answer to your question. Go ahead, Cole.
Okay. Well, anyway, Indianapolis is very like South Africa, because they have a legal system here that is very devious in its operation. They have a bureaucratic system here which works against, well, actually, there's a lot of racism practiced here, but it's kind of underhanded. And they also, the same as the Africans do in South Africa, they have blacks working for them for their interest. They use devious bureaucratic offices to undermine the blacks and the poor in this city. And you'll have to excuse me, I'm really not prepared to explain my situation and what I want to say, but C-SPAN is the only news media where I can get my little viewpoints across, so I'm taking this privilege this morning.
All right.
I'll wait for your comments.
Thank you, Indianapolis. We'll be in your town in late September.
Yeah, I'll be out that way in November myself. But, well, I'm from Michigan. I know that however unfair Indianapolis may be, and I can't comment on that, I know it's not like South Africa. Now, I mean, there may be a remote analogy, but I really think we've got to get away from assuming that these countries are sort of just like us. They're really not. They're vastly different. And the race situation in South Africa is just so unlike ours. It's not just race, you see. That's the first thing. You've got several language groups. You've got different religions. You've got just tremendous differences such as we don't have to cope with in this country. So, and there's no majority there. You always hear about the black majority. Well, people who are black are a majority, but there's no single black majority. There are, I don't know how many tribes, 3 major ones, but so I don't think we can compare these things that way and operate on the assumption that they should behave as we've behaved, assuming that we're right.
Joe Sobran, something interesting in the papers this morning. Can you help explain the following? On the front page of the New York Times, by Alan Cowell, Nightlife with Apartheid, Pool Parties and She-Beans. And this article is all about the differences in the races and the way they live and whatnot. But one of the people that they focus on here is across town in Soweto, Lucky Michaels piloted a plum-colored BMW sedan with $50,000, worth $50,000 around the township's illicit speakeasies called She Beans. And he said things were not going so well. Mr. Michaels is probably one of the black township's few millionaires. Why then the same exact story by a different reporter in the Philadelphia Inquirer this morning by Robert Rosenthal? She Bean King finds South African curfew is bad for business, including the talk about his $50,000 BMW sedan and the fact that as a matter of fact, both reporters obviously were with Lucky Michael as he went around to the different speakeasies. Does that happen very often in journalism, where same story pops up, different newspapers, different reporters?
Yeah, it really does, Brian. I think the reason for that is that it is hard to get a grip on a great big situation, so people tend to imitate each other to be safe. They don't want to stray too far from the caravan, lest they get lost in the desert. So they wind up echoing each other and making all the same mistakes. So we don't have as much diversity as maybe we ought to.
San Bernardino, California. Go ahead, please.
Good morning, Brian.
Good morning.
Good morning, Mr. Sobran.
Good morning.
I read your article on the beehive. It pretty much sums it all up. There's two faces on Africa. I have a couple comments. Two faces on Africa. No one talks about the hideous crimes against humanity in Indochina, Ethiopia, Iran, and Nicaragua. The Afghans suffer the genocide at the hands of the Soviets. What they talk about is South Africa and, as you say, AIDS. I understand that Mr. Getachew Jabesa, a freedom fighter in Ethiopia, stated that, and I read recently in the paper, that Ethiopian aid is being diverted for military purpose, and if you aren't on the side of the Marxist regime in Ethiopia, it's very likely that you will not receive any aid. And Mr. Sowell wrote a nice article yesterday in the paper, syndicated columnist, that made the statement that apartheid began when Harry Truman was president, and it continued through Eisenhower, Kennedy, Johnson, Nixon, Ford, and Carter. Now, are we going to put it all on Mr. Reagan? Are these people today going to say to Mr. Reagan, you're just being stubborn. You're the one who has to change South Africa's policy. We have no more business over there trying to intervene in that problem than we would in some other situations. But like you said, the beehives have something to involve themselves in.
All right, thank you, San Bernardino.
Well, I chose the hive because it's a good example of herd behavior, the kind of group, the mass imitative sort of animal behavior that you find. I mean, these things are matters of moral fashion. If Idi Amin, the bloody dictator of Uganda a few years ago, were to take over in South Africa, I'm sure all the protests would cease. The crowd in front of the swarm in front of the South African embassy would just dissolve. We'd go away. We wouldn't hear about South Africa anymore. As long as he's a black dictator, he can kill as many blacks as he likes, and we don't protest. It's only when it's white people oppressing. They don't have to slaughter. All they have to do is oppress blacks, and we get far more indignant about that than any amount of black on black mass murder. Why? Well, partly because it's embarrassing to us in light of our own past, and partly because it serves certain interests to do that. And there are lots of people who are so earnest and want to show that they are nice people and that their hearts are in the right place, so they make this demonstration. It's a significant word, to demonstrate, to show, to be ostentatious. It's not because they want to actually achieve something. It's because they want to show something.
Joe Sobran, you wrote in your column last week, the hive is adept at selective moralism and the concomitant suspension of moral judgment. In all the liberal press's discussion of AIDS, have you ever seen a single word of disapproval of homosexual acts? Heaven forbid that would be judgmental. What do you mean by that?
Well, that's one of these cant words that we hear, judgmental. It's bad to be judgmental. about, say, homosexuality, but of course it's good to be judgmental about South Africa. It's good to, quote, speak out against South Africa, but of course it's not good to speak out against the Soviet Union. That's called being strident. You're a cold warrior if you do that. So it would be a little out of fashion for people to denounce the Soviet Union in the same way they denounce South Africa. I also use the expression in this column, the Cause of the Month Club. They're people who just seem to take their marching orders. I mean, they always protest together. You'd think some of them would show up other places, that there'd be more diversity. I mean, you know, that some would be picketing, as I say, the Saudi embassy, or they'd find something else. No, it's as if there's a kind of floating orthodoxy, and they all have to protest the same thing every month. They don't know what it's going to be next month, but they'll all be together. You can count on that.
Islip, New York. You're on with Joseph Sobran of the National Review. Go ahead, please.
Morning, gentlemen.
Morning.
Morning.
I would like to digress, if I may, and talk about arms control. Now, there was an interesting article 2 issues back at the National Review by Mr. Hawkins. Now, in here, he alludes to the failures of arms control, and also to the Russia, not the Soviet Union. Now, Lyndon LaRouche has had dissertations about the Soviet Union and their plans. He ties that in not so much to communism, but to a Russian imperialism as laid down by Ivan the Terrible. Now, we're talking about nations' self-interests. If one believes or lends credibility to LaRouche's theory about the Third Rome, what are the prospects for arms control when a Third Rome is the Russian people's, ultimate goal?
All right.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Sobran.
Well, the question is really about how you follow out Lyndon LaRouche's position, and I don't share his position, so I can't really answer it in that respect. But I do think that the Soviet Union is radically different from Tsarist Russia. Now, there are certain points of similarity, but it's not. I mean, they overthrew the Tsars, so they're not going to be following the agenda of Ivan the Terrible.
This morning there are several political things that jump out of the newspapers and the magazines, including there's an editorial in the Washington Post that talks about Bob Dole, Jack Kemp, George Bush, and others. They will follow their economic policies in the future politically. Pick up Time magazine this week, which, by the way, its cover is The Fun of American Food, another August special. Inside, though, Hugh Sidey, who writes about the presidency, jumps to Bob Dole. And eye on the Oval Office, a photograph here of Bob Dole, Senator, Majority Leader from Kansas, has to run for re-election. Dole has already tried and failed to follow the path of those 3 men. He mentioned Hubert Humphrey, Richard Nixon, Lyndon Johnson in the earlier paragraph. Now he wants to skip the intermediate step and go directly to the Oval Office. Here's the line. His gutsy performance as Senate leader over the past 7.5 months may have helped open the way. There are other articles on Bob Dole around. Is this the beginning of the Bob Dole for President campaign?
Well, I think that campaign's been going on for some time. I don't think he's going to succeed. He's a pretty good man in some respects. On the other hand, yeah, here's something interesting. In fact, I'm about to do a column on this very subject. Not all the Republican Party wants realignment. You'd think they would, but they don't. The reason for that is that if there's realignment, if the Republican Party becomes the majority party, it's possible that some people within the party are going to lose stature. It'll turn into a different kind of party, more populist maybe. And the country club Republican type is going to be less important. The Jack Kemp type is going to become more important. So there are people within the Republican Party who'd rather see the party lose than become the majority party on those terms. Now, whether that fits Bob Dole, I don't know. I think it does a little. I'm not sure how much. I don't want to be judgmental about him, but
If you right now had to pick a candidate, who would it be?
oh, Jack Kemp, for sure.
Tucson, Arizona, you're on. Go ahead, please.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Mr. Rose, I'd like to know where I can find that beehive theory, because he's absolutely right. Some friends of mine were going to go down and protest South Africa here, and I asked them what were they going to protest. They didn't tell me what they were going to protest, and they said South Africa. I said, you know nothing about South Africa. People that are going down there protesting don't know things what they're protesting. It's an organized thing. They call people that are protesters, and they all go down and make a big show for the media and in our paper. In the paper, one man said, oh, I just love to protest. I guess that's where he gets his moral high. Well, it made me very angry, because I've worked for civil rights and against racism all my life. And I don't believe in what these people are doing, and I hear Senator Lucas saying, the American people don't know what they are protesting. You better get more in touch with the American people. There are 6 tribes down there in South Africa. Some places in Soweto, and some of those homeless, those houses down there wouldn't look out of place in Beverly Hills or right up in Scottsdale.
All right,
Tutu
Tucson.
lives in a beautiful, palatial place. He will not be hurt by sanctions. He is paid by the church. The World Council of Churches, of which he is a member, they do not look at racism except black and white. They don't look at Asians, looking at the Tibetans. They don't say a thing about the Afghanistan people. They want to have access to their people that's behind these Eastern Bloc countries. And they will not say a thing against racism, the black, white. Chief Buzalezi of the Zulus says that we should not desert those people. He is against sanctions. He wants more investment, not less investment. Economic power will give you political power, and that is the root of South Africa's turmoil.
Okay, Tucson, thank you. Mr. Sobran?
Well, this lady has a very well-informed and intelligent view of things, it seems to me, and she's right about a lot. How much I'm not sure. I mean, those sanctions might be effective, but as she says, they might also hurt the blacks most. I mean, they might have an effect, but it might backfire. Actually, that may be what that may be what's really at stake here. Not whether they're going to have any effect, but whom they're going to affect. They may. In fact, I would think they'd strengthen the hands of the hardliners of apartheid, because you see, the free market tends to undermine the apartheid system. As somebody remarked earlier, most of the petty apartheid laws were passed since 1948, and they interfere with the free market. They interfere with free trade, and what they do, they privilege the unions, the white unions, and they forbid a black man to get his market value for his labor. So to the extent that the free market operates, it does tend to undermine apartheid. Now, the people who think apartheid is a good thing would be all for this. They would sacrifice prosperity to segregation. They'd rather have it. So it would strengthen their hand in a certain sense if we impose sanctions, I suppose.
Joseph Sobran, nationally syndicated columnist, also senior editor with National Review. That photograph you saw earlier on your screen was of Bishop Tutu in his home. This is published in Newsweek magazine. Let me ask you quickly about the reverse beehive theory. What conservatives all run together with what issues do they, is there a beehive theory for conservatives?
Well, I think it applies to human beings pretty generally, that they do imitate each other a good deal. All I want to dispute is the idea that it's sort of intellectual to be on the left. I mean, it's just the opposite in most cases. Samuel Johnson remarked that the opinions of most people are not propagated by reason, but caught by contagion. And it seems to me we have a sort of epidemic of opinion on South Africa.
Springfield, Virginia, here in the Washington suburbs. Go ahead, please.
Yeah, Brian, I got the Washington Post here, and he's talking about this beehive thing. And to me, what's interesting is on the front page of the Washington Post, they have that story alongside of South Africa, the snafus and keeping the Navy ship shape. Now, I mean, to me, that's like a beehive also, because especially the Washington Post, anything they can find on spending in the military. This is a big, large target. Am I going the right direction in your guess there? Is this the way you're discussing it as like a beehive?
Well, the military is always a target. When you remember during World War II, the liberal opinion saw the U.S. military as the arsenal of democracy. That's what it was called then. Now it's the military-industrial complex. So they're attacking it now. In those days, it was directed against forces that were considered reactionary, Hitler and Mussolini. But now it's directed against communism. I mean, that's obviously the direction it's most likely to be used in. And so though the military hasn't changed, the liberal attitude toward it has changed depending on who the enemy is. It's not, as somebody said, it's not a change of heart, it's a change of enemy.
Caller, what do you think of the Washington Post?
I really don't like it. I don't like the loony paper. I prefer the moony paper. But the thing that I'm getting at is on this article here is just prior to the 1980 election when Reagan was elected, the Navy put out a contract, and Newport News, Virginia, bid $230 million to repair that famous aircraft carrier that Mondale seen riding into Philadelphia on.
Oh, yes.
And the Philadelphia Yards bid $520 million. That was $290 million more. I read this in the Richmond papers, not in the Washington Post, because Washington Post wouldn't, they wouldn't dare print something like that. But I heard nothing on it when the Democrats were doing this, and I see this, and it upsets the hell out of me when I read stuff like that.
All right, sir. Thank you. Any comment?
Well, I think the journalism is by no means neutral as it purports to be. I mean, sometimes you think they're just relaying information. Dan Rather calls the media honest brokers of information. Well, that's not always so. I mean, we're dealing here with ethical matters to a great extent. Politics is part of ethics, as people since Aristotle have recognized. And and so people in journalism just naturally tend to report in terms of their values.
Have you had a chance to see Dorothy Rabinowitz's column this morning in the Washington Times?
I saw that in the New York Post last week.
This is a column, and it also has some photographs in here, members of Witness for Peace on their recent sojourn to Nicaragua. And the circles and the arrows, I think, point out some of them. But her theory here is that she starts out by saying all Americans were doubtless relieved to learn that 29 of their fellow citizens in Nicaragua on behalf of the Sandinistas had emerged safely from the ordeal visited on them in the course of their struggle for peace and justice. She says, this, of course, is not the first organization sponsored by the American Friends Service Committee, the Quakers, that is, to display a certain selectivity in their devotion to the cause of nonviolence, as witness the AFSC's own enthusiasm for the Palestinian Liberation Organization. Within 24 hours, these sojourners were making their way to an interview on CBS Evening News and to the introduction for all the world's evocative of concern 40s pageant on the theme of the common man. CBS reporter Michael Connor. They made their final landfall yesterday. Young people, old people from many professions. Women activists is quoted as saying, middle Americans, that's who we are. Did you see more of it? Can you explain that? And do you agree with her premise?
Oh, gee, it's faded a little in my mind, but I think she's suggesting that these are not just typical middle Americans.
Well, let me read another paragraph that might help. So it is possible, it appears, war after war, decade after decade, for our correspondents to encounter the same political phenomenon, the same travelers and the same guys using the same language, and to continue, despite the evidence of history, to take at exactly the same face value of the self-descriptions of these political missionaries. Is the same theory that you have? And,
somewhat, yes.
Are you and Dorothy Rabinowitz fellow travelers?
Actually, I think she's a little sore at me for various reasons, but at any rate, we see eye to eye on this kind of thing. And what gets me here, I mean, what I particularly twig on is this business of the same language. That's the giveaway to me. When people use these cliches, I think it was Sam Goldwyn who said, people are tired of the same old cliches, we need some new cliches. Well, we could use some new cliches in politics, but they wouldn't serve the same function. The hive, as I call it, lives on cliche. You know, peace, social justice. These things are always used tendentiously. They always mean to favor the left. They're always looking for ways to promote the left's causes without using overtly leftist language, so that you find, well, that's why these front groups have always been so popular, and the popular front from the 30s. The thing about bees that, you know, the apiarists have discovered in modern times is that they have a language, that they understand each other. It's not language, of course, like human language, but they send signals all the time. A bee that finds the pollen will come back to the hive and will make little figure eights. And they're so precise about this that the size and shape of the figure eight will tell the other bees which direction to go and how far to go to find that pollen, so that they communicate with each other without using our kind of language, without speaking rationally. In the same way, these cliches, this social justice, this peace, fascist, you know, all these words serve to orient the bees and tell them which way to swarm.
Is your book going to be called The Beehive?
The Hive.
The Hive?
The Hive, yeah.
When would we first, do you think, see it on the newsstand or in the bookstores?
Oh dear. Well, I suppose after I write it. It should take about a month to finish it now. I've been working on it for 5 years with Tom Bethel, as they say, and we're pretty close.
One last question before we take our next call. Dorothy Rabinowitz, you made a comment about her. She's sore at you. I don't need to go into your personal situation, but who is Dorothy Rabinowitz? We quote her often from the Washington Times column.
Well, she's a columnist whose base is the New York Post. She's a very acute observer of the media.
So she spends a lot of time writing only about the media, or does she write about everything?
Mostly about media coverage of politics. And she's very good at exposing how tendentious news coverage is.
Auburn, Massachusetts, go ahead.
Hi, Brian.
Hi.
I'm trying to shut this dog up. You know, C-SPAN is getting better and better. Last week you were terrific. In fact, you sent me reading over the weekend about Africa. And that black editor and the blacks in government and Andy Young's speech. So when I saw it again this morning, I taped it and was so impressed. I'll talk about the beehive after. Can you hear me with that dog barking?
Barely. What's the dog's name? Maybe we can say good morning to him or her and get away with it.
What happened was I went back as far as when the revolutionaries took over Angola. And at that time, we were supporting South Africa, you know, and we were being told Cubans and everybody were in it. Well, what I learned was Chinese were in it, not only Cubans. But anyway, Angola got the yoke of Portugal off. Then, over these 10 years, because this goes back to 1975, the rest of the southern African countries gained their independence. Because at that time, it was Vorster, I think, was controlling Namibia. And that's how it started over there. But gradually, as I read these things, all I could think of is the press isn't telling us anything about, and what I read were the same things that today is coming out before. Here's what Andy Young said. I just heard him say it on his speech. Because everyone's saying it's commies that's taking over Africa. I think it is helpful for us to realize that what we now call liberation movements, which the American public views as basically communist in their origin, are an outgrowth of the missionary activity of American churches. I can't emphasize it too much because look at Angola. Every one of the leaders in Angola was a son of a missionary out of the American or British tradition. Holden Roberta's father was a Baptist. Nito's father was a Presbyterian minister. Jonas Savimbi's father was a Congregationalist Unitarian. Kenneth Kawanza's father was a Presbyterian minister. Jules Nair studied to be a Roman Catholic priest. And it goes on and on. What I'm saying is, what we heard in South Africa is a repeat of 10 years ago. And the leaders of South Africa are known, held Nazis during our World War II. And as we watch what's happening in South Africa, they're all done, but we're getting warned there's going to be terrible violence. You know that happened for 10 years? It was all in these hearings. Every country that tried to get its independence from the yoke of South Africa were told it's going to be violence, it's going to be a bloodbath. Well, I think that South Africa, they've lost. And there's no bloodbath. You know what we did as soon as they saw the countries slowly gain their independence? We slapped embargoes on them. Wouldn't let them, just what we're doing in Nicaragua, so that they'd collapse from the economy. In other words, we worked with South Africa right up until now when President Reagan is. How can he support a Nazi? A man who, by his own admission, forced to it the same way. Now let's get to the beehive.
Okay, let me interrupt because I'm going to have to let you go, Auburn, because we've got 2 other calls waiting and we haven't got much time. But your point, I think, is well taken, and let's get Mr. Sobran to comment on it.
Well, we were on the communist side in World War II. Does that make us evil? I just don't follow the logic of it. I mean, there were people on the Nazi side in World War II who weren't Nazis and aren't. And certainly their descendants can't be smeared as Nazis because their predecessors fought were on the Nazi side in World War II. People form alliances for tactical reasons. I just don't think, I think there's a leap in logic here that isn't justified.
Here's a story in this morning's New York Times. Democratic group stumps California for recruits. This includes 2 of our recent call-in show guests, Governors Bruce Babbitt of Arizona, Governor Chuck Robb of Virginia, both not running again or not able to succeed themselves. Some talk about Mr. Babbitt running for president, and also included in the 3-day visit to California, Mr. Babbitt, Mr. Robb, Mr. Gebhardt from Missouri, and Lieutenant Governor Harriet Woods, who will be on our call-in show later this week as we go to Jeff City, Missouri, the capital of that state, and as we continue our States of the Nation tour around the United States during 1985. Next, we go back to Indianapolis. Good morning.
How wonderful is this? We're also an active member of the Beehive, be able to talk to Joe Sobran.
Go for it.
Okay. I was going back about 10 years of what I was involved in demonstrations and stuff, and I'm amazed that the Beehive here might not work. I went through everything, my different demonstrations I've been to. It's everything from complaining at Roy Innis's office about black support of Idi Amin, to AIPAC demonstrations, to lefty demonstrations against nuclear power. It's not a monolithic group.
Do you get mad when you hear this idea that there's a beehive theory of Mr. Sobran?
No, not necessarily. I understand some people's theory on Soviet domination, but I understand when a lot of lefties complain about Mike Harrington's visceral hatred of Stalinism. I understand where they're coming from. I just think it's over-exaggerated and it takes away intellectual freedom. And I'll leave on that, and I appreciate you see you stand existing because it's a wonderful medium for discussion.
Thank you, Indianapolis, for the call.
Well, this man, if he's been, for instance, in AIPAC demonstrations, American Israel Public Affairs Committee demonstrations, is not a member of the left. That's not a left-wing organization. I mean, I don't mean that all demonstrators belong to the Hive, but I mean that the Hive consists of a lot of people who demonstrate on certain causes that are related to each other. They're really held together by the socialist myths and ideology. That doesn't apply to everyone, though. And some of these people are quite independent-minded, actually. It's just that the group as a whole exhibits this herd behavior.
We told you earlier, U.S. News & World Report has a cover story on South Africa, but inside they have a special interview with Bob Dole, another one of these interviews that brings the spotlight to the majority leader in the U.S. Senate. So we take our last call of the morning. Tampa, Florida. Go ahead, please.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Mr. Sobran, do you recall a couple of years ago you wrote an article in which you equated American liberals with socialists?
Yes.
Yes, sir. I read a reprint of that article here. I have it before me, and I wanted to say something to you. I hope you have a sense of humor. Your theory, your beehive theory, is just as shallow as that article. How would you like it, sir? And I am an independent thinker and happen to be a liberal. How would you like it if I
You can't be both.
American conservatives are fascists? Would you find any justification, any credibility in such a statement?
No.
I'm waiting for your answer.
No, I wouldn't.
Thank you. I wanted to say this, and this is funny to me. The beehive theory, as far as I'm concerned, works both ways, as your host has pointed out. The only difference, sir, is that on the left, intellectuals who are independent thinkers differ very greatly from those on the right who are neither intellectual nor independent in their thinking. I thank you very much.
Mr. Sobran, that's the last call in the morning. You have time to respond if you'd like it.
Sure, thank you. You know, I was in that column where I equated liberals with socialists. I wasn't talking about each and every liberal. I'm talking about the thing as a whole. This has been remarked on time and again by people on the left, including Michael Harrington. And in fact, it was as I recall, it was an interview with Michael Harrington in the Detroit Free Press that was the basis of that column. He was saying, why don't these people quit calling themselves liberals and join us as overt socialists? So it's not as if I was making up something. I was quoting him. Mind you, the communists themselves have always recognized this affinity between themselves and what they call the progressive forces, who generally turn out to be liberals. They've had the Popular Front, they've had these broad coalitions, the Rainbow Coalition, these broad spectrums of opinion you hear about. I went to the big peace rally in New York in, was it 82 or 83? July, it was June 12th, I think, 82. And I mean, we were told by the New York Times, for instance, that this was going to be a rainbow spectrum of opinion, that there were all, in fact, after the event, they reported there were all kinds of people that cut across all ideologies. They were all liberals, communists, pinkos, in between. That was the spectrum. I don't consider it a very wide spectrum. I didn't see any Reaganites there, or libertarians, or for that matter, fascists, who are not the same as libertarians, by the way. You know, these people do have a definite affinity with each other. Let's face it, for Pete's sake, it's sociological reality. Now, there are good liberals, there are even socialists who sharply distinguish themselves from communists, and there are a lot who really don't dissociate themselves as they ought to. They resent being lumped together, but they don't mind marching side by side down the street.
Originally from Ypsilanti, Michigan, a graduate of Eastern Michigan University in 1969, Joseph Sobran with the National Review and a nationally syndicated columnist, our guest for the last hour. On Tuesday morning, we'll start at 8:30 East Coast time looking at newspapers, and Fred Barnes of the New Republic will be our guest from 9 to 10. Join us then. Have a good day.